number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
Why the war draft is a must now. Fellow Ambazonians, after 5 years of relentlessly fighting for the liberation of our homeland from the genocidal occupation of French Cameroon, it's very important that we remember why we are fighting and why it's so absolutely necessary that we continue to fund the struggle by joining the war draft and making even greater sacrifices than before. When the United Nations General Assembly in Resolution 1608-XV of April 21, 1961, granted independence to the Southern Cameroon's Ambazonia, they did not expect that 61 years after, this territory will be forcefully annexed and colonized by a belligerent neighbor. It must be noted here that the territory of the Southern Cameroons had already attained self-government as early as 1954, a status we enjoyed up to 1972, when the state of West Cameroon, Southern Cameroons, was illegally annexed, overrun and occupied by French Cameroon. And because the Southern Cameroons within secure internationally recognized boundaries, she had a functional police force under the direct command of the Prime Minister and head of government, including a mobile paramilitary wing that played the role of a territorial self-defense force. It was this vibrant territorial force that was illegally and surreptitiously disbanded by the Yaoundé regime in the mid-60s, when our nationalist leader and head of government of the Southern Cameroons, Bobe Augustin Ngom, was overthrown by the creeping annexationist regime of Amadou Ahidjo. So as we enter another patriotic war draft and fundraiser for our violent restoration forces, we must remember that just as we restored Dr. Ndele's government on October 1st, 2017, we are also restoring our territorial self-defense force, now dubbed the Ambazonian Restoration Forces, ARF. Charged with not only the defense of our country and our nation, but also with driving out for once the occupation forces of genocidal Cameroon. Taking part in the war draft for our Ambazonian Restoration Forces is therefore a great patriotic duty that we must all embrace. As we speak, the country of Ukraine is under attack, with parts of her territory occupied by the Russians. We have seen how the Ukrainians have risen like one man to defend their territory, instituting a war draft that has prohibited men from the ages of 18 to 60 years of age from leaving the country. Not only are they not allowed to leave the country, but they're also compelled to take an active part in the defense of their country against the occupying forces of Russia. This is the same patriotic fervor that we expect from all Ambazonians now in fulfilling our sacred duty of defending and freeing the motherland from the genocidal grip of Cameroon's occupation forces. Thousands of our young men and women have risen since 2017, picking up arms and fighting the occupation forces to the death. We've lost thousands with many more injured, while thousands more are in the bushes fighting day and night to drive out the occupiers. It's therefore imperative that those of us, especially those in the diaspora, that are not confronting the enemy on the ground play our part and fulfill a sacred duty of drafting, raising the funds, and providing the logistics that our restoration forces need to resist the occupiers. Fellow Ambazonians, joining the draft and contributing generously is not a matter of choice for any Ambazonia, but a sacred duty to oneself, family, and the nation. They say sacrifice makes gods of men, makes us sacred, so let us do our duty now. Our President, His Excellency Dr. Samuel Ikome Sako, and the Resource Mobilization Department will be visiting each and every county soon for another round of the draft. Based on the current geopolitical atmosphere, this is a time for us to empower our restoration fighters on the ground to achieve some of our key strategic and military goals to once more prove to the world that we are ready to not only reclaim but to defend our country after liberation from any future aggression. By building a formidable, responsible, and credible self-defense force, Ambazonians will be proving to the world that we are a responsible state and ready to play a constructive role in the Gulf of Guinea. The rest of the world is watching and waiting to see how capable Ambazonians are in terms of establishing themselves as Africa's newest state. We must therefore make even greater sacrifices in our efforts to upgrade our valiant restoration forces as they lay their lives on the line to liberate Ambazonia. As a footnote, we must remember that it costs between $3,000 to $5,000 to properly equip each restoration fighter to effectively engage the enemy. So as we look up to our boys on the ground, expecting results from them, we must first ask ourselves how far we've gone to empower them. We must first ask ourselves how much financial sacrifices we have made to provide them the means to fulfill their sacred duties. Fellow Ambazonians, this is the time for us to draft until we drop. That must be our slogan and rallying cry now. And along the way, we should be asking ourselves some critical questions. Are we still enjoying 3 square meals a day while our boys on the ground lack the basic gear they need to resist the occupiers? Are we still living a life of luxury and comfort while our brave restoration forces lack medical supplies at the front? Are we still throwing big birthday bashes while our restoration forces lack basic communications equipment to maximize their efforts? Are we still going on cruises and expensive vacations while our IDFs on the ground go without food and logistics? Are we still finding excuses not to make the necessary sacrifices and drafting big while our restoration forces lack the game-changing equipment that they so desperately need to bleed the enemy? On a daily basis, how much are we putting aside for our liberation, knowing that only through fierce resistance are we going to liberate our beloved country? Are we providing the federal government and the CIC the means to carry out some of the critical intelligence and other special operations across the national territory? Fellow Ambazonians, as we ponder these questions, we must remember that a goal that is not funded is nothing but a wish. And we must not let Ambazonia die as a wish, because we failed to fulfill our patriotic duties by making the great sacrifices befitting of a great people. Fellow Ambazonians, the war draft once more is coming to your county. Stand up and be counted. No great victory was ever achieved than by greater sacrifices. We are enough, so let's draft, and draft until we drop. Our existence as a people depends on that.
The number one most important thing for every Ambazonian to do right now is to draft. Draft and draft and draft. People of Ambazonia, draft.
Why the war draft is a must now. Fellow Ambazonians, after 5 years of relentlessly fighting for the liberation of our homeland from the genocidal occupation of French Cameroon. It's very important that we remember why we are fighting and why it's so absolutely necessary that we continue to fund the struggle by joining the war draft and make The media greatly influences society. They inform people about what is happening. It permeates people's lives by creating their own criteria and opinions. In this way, the media moves the masses, creating different social movements.
For over 60 years, the people of Ambazonia were deprived of such privileges. The privilege to enhance their own criteria and opinion. They have suffered cultural genocide for 6 long decades, but not in this age and not with Undaunted ABC Amba News on board.
You must understand that wars are fought and won in the media. The speed of the revolution on Ambazonia's quest for freedom cannot be explained without highlighting the diligent use of the media.
Franco-Cameroon colonizers, among other strategic moves, weaponized the media against Ambazonia for so long, and they continue to do so even today. The question would be, how much do the oppressed people of Ambazonia need to counter the media rage?
Indeed, how much more is required to stop the genocide? The carnage in Ambazonia didn't start today. In 1961, 1972, 1984, and 1992, Ambazonians were slaughtered in huge numbers and help was not forthcoming. Why? Because the oppressor was the piper in the media.
The good news is we have what it takes to dictate the pace.
Right now, ABC Amba TV is taking advantage of the wonders of multimedia aggressively
to inform the misinformed and disinformed with Undaunted and other revolutionary programs bringing it to the news untold stories.
Most importantly, to win the media war by taking ABC Amba TV into every multimedia platform.
In a word, where the importance of storytelling can never be overemphasized, Ambazonians has to tell her own story, not the other way round.
And like we say it always, Ambazonia must narrate her story accurately. We can do this together, you know, right? You are just a click away. Visit our website at www.abcambatv.com, and the steps are quite simple.
With just a click on the website, you can become a club member with so many benefits.
You can also make a one-time donation, advertise and showcase your goods and services at the marketplace on the website.
That was easy, right? You're welcome on board.
And thank you for opting for the winning team.
From the savannah to the Midland and the Atlantic, Ambazonia has risen to fall no more. Ambazonia rise.
Dear Ambazonians on the home front and diaspora.
Dear Ambazonia freedom fighters in the home front and in the diaspora.
The Ethics Commission of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia is coming out to alert you that it is becoming more and more evident that the former British Southern Cameroons, aka Ambazonians, will soon emerge as the newest nation in the world.
We are calling on all of us to start preparing to receive Ambazonia as parents prepare to receive their firstborn child. Malcolm X said, tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. We are already very educated, talented, and very rich in natural resources. Do all this guarantee a safe and prosperous Ambazonia? The answer is an emphatic no. Theodore Roosevelt said, to educate a person in the mind but not in morals is to educate a menace in society.
Ambazonians, it is time to start planning to restore our cultural and social values that characterize us as a people of good repute. Before our Republic to Cameroon invasion, we were respectful of each other, of the law, and of our culture. We earned our living through honest hard work, making clean money for ourselves.
Our values helped us to maximize the benefits of our natural resources as well as our human resources. Southern Cameroons were serene and clean, simply beautiful in spirit and in the physical. We all long for such a place to call home, and we can make it happen by God's grace.
Our local government areas and counties, are you prepared? Do you have an ethics commission in your local government areas, counties to serve as a moral compass for you? Do you have a copy of the Ambazonia Ethics Code and the Constitution?
All arms of government, do you have an ethics agency? Departments of DSS, HSS, Communications and IT, Education, DHACM, DFA and DEINR. Do you have ethics agency to serve as a moral compass for your departments?
Ambazonians, you need to know your rights by reading the Ethics Code and the Constitution.
Shame unethical behavior and reward good behavior in your communities. Hold leaders accountable. Be the watchdog of your communities and governments. See something, say something.
The church, you are the main research center of moral principles with the responsibility of moralizing the society. How effective are you outside the church building?
Maya Angelou said, when you know better, then you do better. Ambazonians watch ethics for an emerging Ambazonia every Friday at 10 p.m. Amba time.
Exclusively on ABC Amba TV. Stay tuned.
The media greatly influences society. They inform people about what is happening. It permeates people's lives by creating their own criteria and opinions. In this way, the media moves the masses, creating different social movements.
For over 60 years, the people of Ambazonia were deprived of such privileges. The privilege to enhance their own criteria and opinion. They have suffered cultural genocide for 6 long decades, but not in this age and not with Undaunted ABC Amba News on board.
You must understand that wars are fought and won in the media. The speed of the revolution on Ambazonia's quest for freedom cannot be explained without highlighting the diligent use of the media.
Franco-Cameroon colonizers, among other strategic moves, weaponized the media against Ambazonia for so long, and they continue to do so even today. The question would be, how much do the oppressed people of Ambazonia need to counter the media rage?
Indeed, how much more is required to stop the genocide? The carnage in Ambazonia didn't start today. In 1961, 1972, 1984, 1992, Ambazonians were slaughtered in huge numbers and help was not forthcoming. Why? Because the oppressor was the piper in the media.
The good news is, we have what it takes to dictate the pace.
Right now, ABC Amba TV is taking advantage of the wonders of multimedia aggressively
to inform the misinformed and disinformed with Undaunted and other revolutionary programs bringing into the news untold stories.
Most importantly, to win the media war by taking ABC Amba TV into every multimedia platform.
In a word, where the importance of storytelling can never be overemphasized, Ambazonians has to tell her own story, not the other way round.
And like we say it always, Ambazonia must narrate her story accurately. We can do this together, you know, right? You are just a click away. Visit our website at www.abcambatv.com, and the steps are quite simple.
With just a click on the website, you can become a club member with so many benefits.
You can also make a one-time donation, advertise and showcase your goods and services at the marketplace on the website.
That was easy, right? You're welcome on board.
And thank you for opting for the winning team.
From the savannah to the Midland and the Atlantic, Ambazonia has risen to fall no more. Ambazonia rise.
Dear Ambazonians on the home front and diaspora.
Dear Ambazonia freedom fighters in the home front and in the diaspora.
The Ethics Commission of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia is coming out to alert you that it is becoming more and more evident that the former British Southern Cameroons, aka Ambazonians, will soon emerge as the newest nation in the world.
We are calling on all of us to start preparing to receive Ambazonia as parents prepare to receive their firstborn child. Malcolm X said, tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. We are already very educated, talented, and very rich in natural resources. Do all this guarantee a safe and prosperous Ambazonia? The answer is an emphatic no. Theodore Roosevelt said, to educate a person in the mind but not in morals is to educate a menace in society.
Ambazonians, it is time to start planning to restore our cultural and social values that characterize us as a people of good repute. Before our Republic to Cameroon invasion, we were respectful of each other, of the law, and of our culture. We earned our living through honest hard work, making clean money for ourselves.
Our values helped us to maximize the benefits of our natural resources as well as our human resources. Southern Cameroons were serene and clean, simply beautiful in spirit and in the physical. We all long for such a place to call home, and we can make it happen by God's grace.
Our local government areas and counties, are you preparing? Do you have an ethics commission in your local government areas, counties to serve as a moral compass for you? Do you have a copy of the Ambazonia Ethics Code and the Constitution?
All arms of government, do you have an ethics agency? Departments of DSS, HSS, Communications and IT, Education, DHACM, DFA and DEINR. Do you have ethics agency to serve as a moral compass for your departments?
Ambazonians, you need to know your rights by reading the Ethics Code and the Constitution.
Shame unethical behavior and reward good behavior in your communities. Hold leaders accountable. Be the watchdog of your communities and governments. See something, say something.
The church, you are the main research center of moral principles with the responsibility of moralizing the society. How effective are you outside the church building?
Maya Angelou said, when you know better, then you do better. Ambazonians, watch Ethics for an emerging Ambazonia every Friday at 10 p.m. Amba time.
Exclusively on ABC Amba TV. Stay tuned.
The media greatly influences society. They inform people about what is happening. It permeates people's lives by creating their own criteria and opinions. In this way, the media moves the masses, creating different social movements.
For over 60 years, the people of Ambazonia were deprived of such privileges. The privilege to enhance their own criteria and opinion. They have suffered cultural genocide for 6 long decades, but not in this age and not with Undaunted ABC Amba News on board.
You must understand that wars are fought and won in the media. The speed of the revolution on Ambazonia's quest for freedom cannot be explained without highlighting the diligent use of the media.
Franco-Cameroon colonizers, among other strategic moves, weaponized the media against Ambazonia for so long, and they continue to do so even today. The question would be, how much do the oppressed people of Ambazonia need to counter the media rage?
Indeed, how much more is required to stop the genocide? The carnage in Ambazonia didn't start today. In 1961, 1972, 1984, and 1992, Ambazonians were slaughtered in huge numbers and help was not forthcoming. Why? Because the oppressor was the piper in the media.
The good news is we have what it takes to dictate the pace.
Right now, ABC Amba TV is taking advantage of the wonders of multimedia aggressively
to inform the misinformed and disinformed with Undaunted and other revolutionary programs bringing to the news untold stories.
Most importantly, to win the media war by taking ABC Amba TV into every multimedia platform.
In a word, where the importance of storytelling can never be overemphasized, Ambazonians has to tell her own story, not the other way round.
And like we say it always, Ambazonia must narrate her story accurately. We can do this together, you know, right? You are just a click away. Visit our website at www.abcambatv.com, and the steps are quite simple.
With just a click on the website, you can become a club member with so many benefits.
You can also make a one-time donation, advertise and showcase your goods and services at the marketplace on the website.
That was easy, right? You're welcome on board.
And thank you for opting for the winning team. Good evening and welcome to Undaunted, bringing into the news untold stories. I am Star Smart. Let's begin. After several months of denial, a London court reveals that SNH and Sonara managers have been part of the Glencore oil fraud and corruption. A lofty sum of over 7 billion francs CFA had changed between Glencore enhancers and La République du Cameroon fraudsters. We are not surprised anyway. Glencore global fraud in oil prices and manipulations couldn't have escaped them. It is just but normal in the Cameroon to have political corporate managers, most Yaoundé appointees, involved in huge embezzlement and bribery. In fact, it would have been a surprise not to have La République du Cameroon's fingerprint in this oil fraud. That's not the puzzle. Achiba Nelson believes that barrister Akere Muna is hypocritical in his recent utterances towards this outcome. Meanwhile, we are not done with the UK-Rwanda deportation treaty. Believe that Rwanda is a brutal, repressive regime, and we are definitely not wrong for thinking that holding the Commonwealth Summit there is a sham. Why is PM Boris Johnson in Africa for the so-called Commonwealth? Why Rwanda? Critics have questioned the real objective of the choice, and that will be the melting point of our discussion tonight. An Anglophone Southern Cameroonian-born lawyer elected as president of the Franco-Cameroon Bar Association. This has frustrated Ambazonians who consider such behaviors a betrayal from lawyers who provoked the current war. I know you can wait for us to start, but first, let's get the prime headline.
Prime headlines. With the war raging and food prices soaring, Trudeau attends Commonwealth Summit in Rwanda. Commonwealth heads of government meeting starts on the shadow of UK's controversial Rwanda deportation plan. Rwanda is a brutal, repressive regime. Holding the Commonwealth Summit there is a shame. The Esu Hospital is being used in its entirety by La République du Cameroon military as an accommodation and an armory. According to Bui County Situation Report, today Thursday, 23rd June 2022, at exactly 7 a.m., Amba, the Bui warriors gave La République du Cameroon terrorists stationed at the Sonel and prison yard in Tobin, Kumbo LGA, a rude awakening. The elections of Ambazonian-born lawyer Amba into the Franco-Cameroon Bar as president turns off Ambazonians. Ex-Manchester United winger Ryan Giggs resigns as Wales manager.
It was predicated that the war in Ukraine would cast its shadow over Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other Commonwealth national leaders as they arrived in Rwanda on Wednesday for their first meeting since the onset of the pandemic. Trudeau touched down in Kigali late in the day as events and forums surrounding the meeting, including sessions on gender equality and the economic leadership of women, began in the heavily guarded capital. This is the debut of tonight's full briefings. As always, I will be peddling the waves with Star Smart. Good evening, Star.
Good evening, Onyi. Straightforwardly, I would like to say this. Rwanda is a brutal, repressive regime. Holding the Commonwealth Summit there is a sham and period. We will definitely get into that argument tonight. Just stay with us. Fellow Ambazonians, ladies and gentlemen, food security, particularly in Africa, is expected to be a major topic of the Leaders' Conference. So is the fact that multiple major countries abstained from a resolution condemning Russia's invasion of its Eastern European neighbor at the United Nations earlier this year.
In an interview with CBC Radio's The House, Trudeau said the challenge facing Ukraine allies is to engage in a very, very real and sustained way with leaders who are skeptical of sanctions to make them understand that Russia is trying to destabilize the world and set democracy and the rule of law back by decades. It's important for everyone, not just European countries, that we be standing up to that attempt to redraw the world order, he added. 10 Commonwealth members, Bangladesh, India, Mozambique, Namibia, Pakistan, South Africa, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, formally abstained from a UN vote last March, which condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. While not legally binding, resolutions of the UN General Assembly carry political weight. Trudeau said there is an argument to be made to convince India and South Africa, which he said, and I quote, pride themselves very much on principles of democracy, principles of territorial integrity, of sovereignty, of a people being able to determine their own future, to push back against Russia's war on Ukraine.
It remains to be seen how effective those arguments will be. India, for one, has been buying discounted Russian oil and coal at an increasing rate. India is the world's third largest consumer of oil, and over 80% of it is imported. Moscow was not a major supplier of oil to India before the invasion. In January and February of this year, India did not import any crude from Russia at all. Today, Russia is India's second largest source of oil. The Commonwealth meeting, Trudeau said, will be an opportunity to remind countries that they don't have to make nice with Russia, and to underline the fact that Moscow is the instigator of all this instability around the world, particularly regarding food security. This is not all. Diplomatic ties are being enforced. New embassy planned in Rwanda. Canada will further attempt to hammer home that message by increasing its diplomatic presence, upgrading the mission in Rwanda to a full embassy with a high commissioner. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly described Rwanda as strategic within Africa and said it has demonstrated a leadership role on the continent. Yes, we know Russia is present on the continent, she said. Yes, we know China is also increasingly present on the continent, so we can't be naive. We need to make sure we have our diplomats on the ground with their eyes and ears listening to what's going on. Ukraine and, to a lesser extent, Russia are among the biggest suppliers of grain to Africa, where food prices are now soaring.
Russia has tried to blame Western sanctions for these price spikes. Trudeau pointed out that the sanctions on Russia do not affect shipments of food and grain. Much of Ukraine's grain for export is still stuck in the countries because its ports have been sealed off by a Russian naval blockade. Colin Robertson, a former diplomat and foreign policy expert with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, said the Commonwealth meeting presents Trudeau with a real opportunity, given that some other leaders may be absent and Australia's recently elected Prime Minister is just getting his feet wet on the international stage. Robertson said he expects to see more substantive discussion at the G7 leaders meeting in Germany, which will take place immediately after the summit in Rwanda. The Commonwealth, he said, is a useful forum, but perhaps less useful than it used to be.
The Queen, the head of the Commonwealth, will be represented at the meeting by Prince Charles. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to underline the economic advantage of the organization, including the value of preferential trade among members, according to reports in the UK media. Last week, in anticipation of the meeting, Trudeau spoke with Rwanda's President Paul Kagame. A senior government official speaking on background said the Prime Minister will have more conversation with other leaders heading into the summit. Trudeau flies to Rwanda as that country's human rights record is again being called into question. Human rights group last week expressed concern about the imprisonment and beating of Rwanda dissidents. A British government plan to deport asylum seekers to Rwanda has added another factor to those concerns. Earlier today, the British Premier arrived in Rwanda for the Commonwealth Summit. Gabellison has more.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson arrives Rwanda. British Prime Minister arrives in Rwanda for Commonwealth Summit. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting starts under shadow of UK's controversial Rwanda deportation plan. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is in the Rwandan capital Kigali for a summit of Commonwealth countries where global challenges will be discussed. I've arrived in Rwanda for CHOGM to address global challenges from hunger to climate change and to turbocharged trade with some of the world's most dynamic economies, Johnson said on Twitter early on Thursday. With our shared values, history and language, the Commonwealth is a unique and vital association, he added. The British Premier is expected to develop his country's trade ties with the 54-member club as the country's trade with the EU has shrunk since Brexit and saw its highest inflation rates of the last 40 years. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting will also include representatives from Australia and Jamaica, two countries that have in recent years been discussing cutting ties with the British monarchy. Prince Charles is representing Queen Elizabeth II at the meeting that is convening for the first time since 2018 due to the pandemic. The event coincided with uncertainty over the British government's controversial Rwanda plan, with which it plans to remove thousands of asylum seekers to the East African country. Its first planned flight was grounded on June 14th after a last-minute legal intervention from the European Court of Human Rights. Prince Charles has described the plan as appalling and said he was more than disappointed by the deportation plan, according to the Times. The Commonwealth Summit will continue on Sunday. It is important for us to note that the UK government plans to introduce a bill for local courts to supersede ECHR rulings on Rwandan plan. The Bill of Rights came to Parliament on Wednesday following Strasbourg Court's intervention in the first Rwandan flight last week. The British government is set to introduce a new bill on Wednesday to empower courts to make the final decision on the removal of asylum seekers to Rwanda and the deportation of foreign criminals, superseding the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights (ECHR). The Bill of Rights, which will be brought to the House of Commons, aims to make the country's Supreme Court the final decision maker on such cases. This comes after the ECHR in Strasbourg blocked the UK government's first flight to Rwanda under a controversial scheme last week by removing individuals who were to be sent to the Eastern African country. The Bill of Rights will strengthen our UK tradition of freedom whilst injecting a healthy dose of common sense into the system, said Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Minister. These reforms will reinforce freedom of speech, enable us to deport more foreign offenders, and better protect the public from dangerous criminals. Speaking to Sky News, Raab said it was legitimate to push back against the ECHR rulings and that he wanted the new bill to assert that British courts were not always bound by ECHR rulings. The bill will need the approval of both houses of parliament as well as royal assent to become law. Human rights activists, legal professionals, and non-governmental organizations have come out in harsh opposition against the Rwanda plan. The first flight to Rwanda, which would have carried at least 7 asylum seekers, was cancelled last week after the ECHR's intervention. Gab Ellison reporting for Undaunted, ABC Amba News.
Now you understand what we say, that Rwanda is brutal. And when we say that Rwanda is a reprogressive regime. And we are definitely not wrong for thinking that holding the Commonwealth Summit there is a sham.
A big sham, pathetic. But there is a debate we intend to enhance. Two schools of thought. While Nijo, the Director of Resource Mobilization, believes that UK is right, Barrister Timothy Mbeseha, the Chairman for the Judiciary Commission, says the deportation of refugees policy by the UK is illegal. We tend to bring them both here for that discussion this weekend. But let's get right in. From time immemorial, there have always been two organizations whose meetings regularly took place amid widespread media indifference: the Organization of African Unity, OAU, and the Commonwealth.
There were solid reasons for our lack of enthusiasm. Such great get-together were strong on pump and rigmarole. But interesting decisions usually took place behind closed doors. Both organizations were widely seen as little more than dictators. Club attuned to the interests of ruling elites while aloof from the millions of citizens they normally represented. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting Chogam in Kigali, Rwanda this week will do nothing to challenge those assumptions. Held in a country primed to receive Britain's unwanted migrants, a deal that even Prince Charles, who will be chairing for the first time apparently, regards as appalling. The meeting will highlight the weaknesses of the organization on which Britain is pining its hopes of future global relevance.
In the run-up to the EU referendum, Brexiters talked up the benefits of ditching the EU in favor of a market that thanks to the vastness of Britain's defunct empire, holds 2.5 billion consumers, a third of the global population. And since Brexit, it is true that free trade agreements have been signed with Australia, New Zealand, and Singapore, while a host of other deals are being negotiated with members of the 54-nation association. But the Commonwealth, like the EU, aims to be more than a trading bloc. Supporters talk about a value-based organization, its nominal belief in individual liberty, the democratic process, the rule of law, and the importance of civil society were enshrined in both the Harare Declaration in 1991 and a Commonwealth Charter adopted in 2012. Rwanda's hosting of CHOGM exposes a gaping hole where delivery should be. Kigali will certainly look fantastic. The city where Hutu militarian once hacked Tutsi families to death at roadblocks has been transformed into a gleaming conference hub. The flower beds have been meticulously weeded. Every curb will have been freshly painted. There won't be a homeless person in sight.
But the explanation for that later detail, before important get-togethers, the government relocates homeless people to transit centers for re-education. Highlights why the choice of Rwanda sends out nothing but worrying signals about where the Commonwealth is heading. Last year, at a UN Human Rights Conference in Geneva, British officials robustly called out Rwanda on its second of extrajudicial killings, disappearances, and torture. Once the asylum seekers deal was signed, the tone abruptly changed, with Johnson's praising Rwanda as one of the safest destinations in Africa, while Priti Patel talked admiringly of a country where refugees could prosper and thrive. A Commonwealth that looks its own charter seriously would have reached out to those who have been domestically silenced, jailed bloggers and citizen journalists. For example, an international coalition of 24 human rights and journalist groups has formally called on heads of government to press for detainees to be freed and for guarantees that Rwandan media and civil society will be allowed to work freely during and after Chogen.
But the Hutu opposition leader, Victor Ingabire, whose jailing prevented her running in presidential elections, has seen her request to attend the civil society event running alongside the main meeting stubbornly ignored. It seems the people at the Commonwealth are collaborating with the government of Rwanda to exclude me, she said. Chogam in Kigali, it seems, will faithfully reflect its unaccountable, exclusionary host state. Thanks to COVID, which forced Chogam to be twice postponed, the Commonwealth actually had 2 years in which it could have credibly announced an alternative venue to Kigali. But that would have required something approaching a backbone. As it is, the organization has certainly shown itself to be a value-based organization. They just aren't the values many of its billions of citizens share. Let's get into the Glencore oil fraud right after the break.
Fellow Ambazonians, today and for the following weeks, we would like to start focusing on the specific deeds of French Cameroon, which affirm, for all intent and purposes, to all of us in Ambazonia, that we are indeed different from the Central Africans of Cameroon, to which the General Assembly of the United Nations on April 21st, 1961, acting on an abundance of goodwill towards pleading by genuine West African leaders not to create many microstates on our continent, voted to establish a federation in the Cameroons under the guarantorship of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Fellow Ambazonians, your interim government has mapped out the admissions of French Cameroon leaders, starting with President Ahidjo, to the United Nations in the 1959 to 1961 timeframe, Amadou Ahidjo Agreement with Premier Django Foncha in Douala about an equitable federation of equals, and more recently, Mr. Paul Biya's distorted narrative on the genesis of the struggle for sovereign statehood in Ambazonia. Speaking at the Paris Peace Forum on November 12, 2009, Mr. Biya sought to misrepresent our struggle to restore independence. He went completely off the agenda of the Paris Peace Forum, which was for think tanks, companies, governments from around the world to think, define the challenges and solutions to global problems. President Paul Biya of French Cameroon, who attended this conference, was interviewed by the Sudanese billionaire Mo Ibrahim. Here is what Mr. Biya said about the War of Independence Restoration in Ambazonia. My country is complex. We were first a German colony. After the First World War, Germany lost its colonies, which were shared between Great Britain and France. And my country was divided. Some were under British colonization and others under French colonization. The result has been a juxtaposition of culture and civilization that makes things quite different. President Biya completely runs away from the root causes of the conflict, some of which he personally created as a trade-off to France to stay in power for life. Let us briefly go through the first two root causes involving Mr. Biya's direct involvement. Problem number one, the assimilationist project. The doctrine of the assimilationist project is admitted by Le Monde newspaper, published in Paris on January 24, 2017. The journal hits the nail on its head by stating very clearly that the matter at issue concerns long-standing efforts by the French-speaking and French-dominated governments of Ahidjo and Paul Biya in Yaoundé to annihilate the Anglo-Saxon cultural heritage in the southern Cameroons by replacing English with French through decrees and administrative measures. Both France and Cameroon seek to subject the people of Ambazonia to the controversial cooperation accords signed on the 26th of December 1959 between Amadou Ahidjo for French Cameroon and Charles de Gaulle for France. France currently confiscates between 50 to 80% of the foreign earnings of Ambazonia, despite absence of a treaty of union with proxy French-speaking Cameroon or any other instrument with Ambazonian leaders authorizing such expropriation. We demand that France acts under provisions of her 1959 cooperation treaty with Cameroon to determine the proper political orientation for that country. We in Ambazonia are resolute, have no ambition towards Cameroon territory, and will self-defend vigorously against French Cameroon until justice is done.
You just heard from the Secretary of State for Communications and IT. I guess you will understand why corruption can just be a free flow in the Cameroons. We have someone taking advantage of the UK court indictment to gain political points, Barrister Akere Muna. Before we go further, let's ask ourselves, who is Akere Muna? He seems to be very controversial. It is quite funny how all of a sudden Akere Muna agrees to the corruption in La République du Cameroon after stating otherwise few weeks back. 1 minute he seems to be defending the Cameroons and another minute he seems to be against them. Does this mean it's the court's rhetoric that determines his position? Akere Tabeng Muna was born on the 18th day of August 1952. He is a Cameroonian lawyer. We'll be back after this break. before we went on that break, we were asking who is Akere Muna. Now, I said earlier, he seems to be very controversial. It is quite funny how all of a sudden Akere Muna agrees to the corruption in La République du Cameroon after stating otherwise a few weeks ago. 1 minute he seems to be defending the Cameroons and another minute seems to be against them. And we asked, does this mean it's the court's rhetorics that determines his position? Now let's get to find out who he is. Akere Tabang Muna was born on the 18th day of August 1952. He is a Cameroonian lawyer who is currently the chairman of the International Anti-Corruption Conference Council.
He is also the Sanctions Commissioner of the African Development Bank Group and a member of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa. He previously served as the Vice Chair of Transparency International, and he has presided over the Economic, Social and Cultural Council, ECOSOC, of the African Union, the Pan-African Lawyers Union, and the Cameroon Bar Association. Muna has denied having any political aspirations in Cameroon and has stated that his interest remains in his work as a lawyer and with civil society organizations.
However, Jeune Afrique, a leading African weekly, has described him as both a credible and the possible successor to President Paul Biya, given his prominence in Cameroon and his accomplishments on the international stage, especially in the areas of anti-corruption and good governance. In 2000, Akere Muna founded the Cameroon chapter of the anti-corruption watchdog Transparency International. In the 2 previous years, Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, CPI, had listed Cameroon as the most corrupt of the countries surveyed. Many, therefore, thought it was risky for Akere Muna to head an organization that challenged the status quo. The Cameroon government strongly challenged TI's assessments and even considered suing TI. Muna and associates lost many clients during this period, as many of those clients wanted to avoid government error as a result of any association with the firm. Eventually, the government formed an ad hoc committee presided over by the Prime Minister to combat corruption.
Akere Muna was a member of that committee. In his capacity as president of the Cameroon Bar, critics of the Biya regime have questioned Akere Muna's representation of the Cameroon government and several parastatal institutions in litigation both within Cameroon and abroad. They point to a disconnect between his role in promoting good governance and combating corruption across the globe, with his defense of a regime that has been riddled with accusations of corruption and undemocratic practices.
Like Bala, Akere Muna is a butterfly that thinks itself like a bird. He should have known that speaking French or romancing with francophones doesn't make him a francophone, because no matter how many years the stone is in the river, it shall never become a crocodile. Akere Muna wants to make a name, or like La République, the Cameroon president, claiming he wants to fight against corruption, injustice between Glencore and some La République du Cameroon officials who were bribed with 7 billion francs CFA for oil from Indian, Southern Cameroon's, not La République du Cameroon oil. He wants to behave as if La République du Cameroon owns Southern Cameroon's oil. If he could fight injustice, corruption, why not correct the injustice La République du Cameroon did on Southern Cameroon's, something his father admitted to?
Why should he be concerned with La République du Cameroon injustice without thinking of how his father sold Southern Cameroon to La République du Cameroon? What is 7 billion francs CFA compared to what La République du Cameroon has benefited from selling Indian and Southern Cameroon's oil? Remember, his father returned from the United Nations and admitted he made a mistake that has taken the lives of hundreds of thousands of Southern Cameroonians since 1961, that has brought war, genocide, refugees, hundreds of villages roasted, etc. Shouldn't justice start between Southern Cameroons and La République du Cameroon? Children who like Akere Muna, who who, like Akere Muna, who grew up and failed to pay their parents' debts or correct their parents' errors, shouldn't be trusted both by Ambazonians and La Republic du Cameroon. Akere Muna, son of Solomon Tandeng Muna, who also betrayed Ambazonia in 1968, Ahijo used his father Solomon Tandeng Muna to kick out Augustine Ngomjua, and he too was tagged a betrayal for accepting the position of presidential candidate for the last presidential election that took place in Cameroon in defiance to the will of the Ambazonians.
This report has it that Glencore Gate Company pleads guilty to bribery. Akere Muna says actions shouldn't be taken against SNH Sonora Commodity Trading Company. Glencore on Tuesday, June 21, 2022, pleaded guilty to bribing Cameroon's National Oil Refining Company, Sonora, and Petroleum Depot SNH. Glencore pleaded guilty to 7 counts of corruption after admitting that it paid Sonora and SNH the sum of 10.5 million euros, equivalent to about 7 billion francs CFA.
A subsidiary of commodities giant Glencore plc entered a corporate guilty plea in the UK on Tuesday as part of a series of deals with authorities in that country, the US and Brazil, to resolve allegations of bribery and market manipulations. The subsidiary, Glencore Energy UK Limited, admitted to paying more than 28 million US dollars in bribes to secure access to oil across its operations in 5 African countries, including Nigeria, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Equatorial Guinea, and South Sudan, according to an indictment filed in London's Southwark. Farmers reported in the month of May that Glencore's oil price rigging put spotlight back on benchmarks.
At that time, Glencore plc settlements with U.S. prosecutors has cast fresh light on the manipulation of an under-the-radar part of the commodities world that crucial for violating fiscal deals and derivatives. The raw material giant this week agreed to plead guilty to rigging fuel oil assessment prices after probes into wide-ranging bribery and corruption. The process for setting the benchmarks involves price reporters polling traders in the market for bids, offers, and transactions so that they can publish values on products that otherwise would remain private information. It is a highly important part of the industry. Billions of dollars of fiscal deals are set against the daily benchmarks, which also act as a reference price for big amounts of derivatives. Yet, they are often based on a relatively small number of trades, or none at all, which can give large trading houses an incentive to manipulate physical markets to benefit their derivative positions.
Glencore admitted to conspiring to manipulate from 2011 to 2019 fuel benchmarks set